Hi there, my name is Memo. This is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me and in front of me today. It's tropical houseplants. And today is going to be a continuation of the plant review series, and it's going to be about this beast of a plant that I've got in front of me. I'll lift it up so you can see the other leaf. There used to be a couple more, but they were dying off, and I have chopped those off, but we'll touch on that in just a moment. But essentially, it is for a plant that is called the Anthurium bullatus, if I'm not mistaken. There is another name, and I'll add it at the top because it is eluding me at the moment. But very, very cool plant, and we'll dive into it. And this might be one that not a lot of people know about. But before we get into any of that, let's lay down some ground rules. So if you're one of the regulars and you're coming back, welcome back. It's nice to have you again. You know by this point, if you just look at the progress bar below, you can skip to the chapter that you want to watch. If you are new, however, this is predominantly going to be for you, and thank you for joining the slight insanity that is this plant review series. And as I said, it's this kind of ground rules is more going to be for the people that have just joined for the first time now. And it's to kind of say that there is zero way that I can make these reviews unbiased. These are my biased opinions about growing my specific plant in my conditions. And for this plant and a lot of my other plants, you can see it around me, I'm growing in a conservatory in the UK, and whatever that might mean in terms of light, humidity, cold, heat, all of the above, basically. So just be aware of that, that my conditions might be different from your conditions. But part of the reason why I make these plant reviews is so that people can add their experiences down below and explain to people that this is what my plant experience has been with this specific plant, my growing experience. Plant experience? Plant experience. What my growing experience has been with this specific plant. And these are my growing conditions so that people can kind of learn that way. Because certain plants like this one, which are probably not talked about anywhere near as much as they probably should be, there's not an awful lot of information online, and there's not a lot of information from individuals actually growing it in their conditions. So hopefully this will become a repository for such information. Coming into the first topic, which is background on this one, and this is an interesting one because when I purchased it, I'd never heard of this plant before, and I'll show you the plant again. So that is its newest leaf. I'm trying not to handle it too much because it is still kind of soft and growing in. That is its previous leaf there, basically. And I get why this might not be an anthurium for everybody. However, I'm going to say a few things during this video that might change your opinion. But yes, I got this from eBay, I think, and it was an impulse purchase. I was purchasing something else and I came across this plant and I'm just like, the baby leaves didn't look that interesting, but they're just like, this is what the mature specimen could look like. And I'm just like, it's interesting. Let's add that into the basket and see how it goes along, basically. And that was kind of the reality of how this plant came into my care. It wasn't one that I've heard of, and I would assume a lot of people probably wouldn't have heard of it before either. It's not one of the big ones. It's not a queen anthurium. It's not a anthurium vecha. It's not the king anthurium. But it shares some of its qualities, and it's also got, I don't know if you can notice, these very, very pronounced lobes that kind of get that kind of Mickey Mouse ear situation going on. It is quite wide, so it might not be for everybody. It does have some beautiful ruffling in the front of the leaves, and it can grow tall. So let me just give you an idea of where the pot is. You can see how tall it is. And as long as you kind of tie it up, it can be quite a compact plant. Otherwise, it can kind of flop all around the place. And just to give you an indication on, I don't know if you can see quite how much that stem is, and you can see aerial roots for days, even more so than any of the other anthuriums that I own in my collection. This is one of those, basically. I will see if I've got a picture to add here from when I first got this plant from my plant care app, and you can see hopefully in that picture the difference between the leaves and how the leaves mature and they change appearance. So this is definitely one that it will be more showy the more mature it gets, because when it's quite juvenile, it's impressive, but not quite as impressive as this. And yeah, I think that was pretty much it. I kind of stumbled across this plant and didn't know, because as I mentioned, this is one of the plants that I've never really seen an awful lot of information online. So there wasn't an awful lot of kind of care advice or care experiences that people have had. So I thought at least I will add mine here. It's interesting because Nikki from Plants, Pots and What's Nots had put on Instagram probably a year ago now that she was struggling with the same thing that I've got. And I will talk about this rip on the leaf in the accessories and care section. And I was just like, oh, it's not just me, it's somebody else as well. But again, this is an information that is readily available to everybody because not that many people have this plant. But yeah, I think that's everything I wanted to touch on in terms of the background on this plant. Let's move on to the next topic. So speed of growth, and this one is truly exciting with this plant, I will say. Hands down, fastest Anthurium in my collection. By far the fastest Anthurium in my collection. I don't think, and the title will have this here, I don't think I've had this for longer than a year, maybe two. And at the rate that it has grown is something that I have never seen with any other Anthurium. How now the leaves are an interesting one because the leaves, it will bring out, so again, I'll do the usual benchmarks. If I'm benchmarking this against a golden pothos in the same conditions, so in the conservatory, I've got one down below, and if that brings out 2 or 3 new leaves in the summer months per month, this one might bring out 1 to 2 leaves. So the 2 leaves is where it starts getting fast for an Anthurium. Does this also bring out leaves in the winter? Yes, but it's much slower. So it might bring out a new leaf every 2 or 3 months in the winter months, which again for an Anthurium is quite interesting because a lot of my Anthuriums in the winter almost go into hibernation mode and just go, I'm out for the cold months. This one is different. And I don't know whether or not it's a specific one that I've got that's been quite good. I'm really curious if anybody else has got this plant and they want to share their experiences down below, what your experiences have been. But this has been ridiculously fast for me. For an Anthurium, I will caveat that because Anthurium can be a bit slow sometimes. But yeah, like truthfully, super, super fast. And from those juvenile leaves that you saw from my plant care app when I first got this plant to now, it didn't take very long at all, especially if I'm thinking about things like my Anthurium veitchii, because I've pretty much had that from a little plant essentially to the size and the beast that it is now. That took a while. And I'm kind of looking at its newest leaf and it's doing all the leafy things. I know it's a bit of a sidestep here, but let me show you that really quickly because I am so happy about it. You can see quite how large and in charge the previous leaves have been, but look at the size of this, and we'll do a head test just to begin. But this has grown exponentially, and I'm so super happy for it. But and back to the actual plant that I'm reviewing. But yeah, super fast for Anthurium, just impressive, basically. So if you want to get into Anthuriums, I don't think this was also particularly expensive. I'll touch on that on availability. But this is a really cool one if you want a fast-growing Anthurium and you don't want to hang around. This isn't going to be one, obviously, that you're looking at if you want to get those heart-shaped leaves. This is an entirely different structure. So I do appreciate that. And I also appreciate the fact that it's not going to be for everybody for that reason. I think there's a lot of love that goes around for those heart-shaped leaves. But I quite like weird-looking plants, and this to me has a slight weird vibe about it. So coming into ease of propagation, I'll show you. I've not propagated this personally, but I know from other people that have propagated it. I mean, the aerial roots go on for days with this one. More so, it's very prolific with its aerial roots. And also, there's another point I'm trying to make here is, I don't know if you can see the kind of internodal space on this specific Anthurium can be quite wide. Now, that can also mean that you saw that stem, it can get quite leggy and tall, but it's really easy for you to kind of go between the internodes and slice away to get a clean cut, which I find with a lot of other Anthuriums isn't quite so easy. You're kind of going through very tight spaces in order to get that cut. This is a lot more forgiving, and based on what I've seen from other people when they're propagating it, and to be fair, I think what I had was a propagate. This grows fast after, like, when it starts rooting out. I would obviously encourage, maybe the way that you would do it is the way that you would maybe air layer something else, is to maybe give it, and I've given it a bit of a moss collar right at the bottom there, you might be able to see, but do that a bit higher up and let those aerial roots really dive in there. And as soon as they start getting some more roots, do the cut then, and then move that into its growing media. And that should help speed up the whole process a lot more, basically. But relatively straightforward for propagation, purely because of those things, as I've mentioned, like the space between the nodes. And I don't know whether or not it's just mine. I would assume it's everybody's, but that space between the nodes, the fact that it will quite happily bring out chunky aerial roots, which would hopefully make that propagation a lot easier. This is a really strong contender to kind of chop and prop as much as you want. I don't know, because as I said, if I haven't propagated this, whether or not the maturity of the leaves would remain. I would imagine if you're doing it from a top cutting, it would kind of remain some of that, and maybe you might go for slightly more juvenile leaves down below. But again, based on what I was just talking about on the previous section in terms of speed of growth, it won't take you very long at all to get it to a stage where it's got the slightly more mature looking leaves. And this can get even larger from what I've seen. This can get quite sizable, basically. So that is something to bear in mind. Now, moving on to availability with this one. And this is an interesting one because, again, I'll base it on my experience within the UK. I would imagine some of this is true for Europe as well. This isn't one that comes up super often, but I think it's because not that many people are aware of it. So, having said that, when it did come up, even when I bought it, I think it was kind of low double digits, very, very low double digits. It's not kind of fetching the prices that you might get for something like a Queen Anthurium or a King Anthurium, or probably on par or maybe a tiny bit cheaper than an Anthurium crystallinum now, because Anthurium crystallinum prices have done a massive nosedive and they're a lot easier and cheaper to come by. This is not as easy to come by, but when you do, and if you really do like the look of this, I'd say snap it up, because not necessarily that it's going to go fast, but they don't come up that often, at least in my experience. And it's a shame because, as I said, very, very, very cool plant. Has the price fluctuated too much from when I first bought it? No, I don't think. Based on the prices that I'm seeing now, it's kind of on par. But it's, again, I think it's predominantly because not that many people are aware of this specific plant. And I'm also slightly aware as well that it's interesting because a lot of people ask for reviews on kind of like specific plants that I've got, and I've got them kind of on the list of videos to come out. But usually a lot of times if I'm talking about plants that nobody's ever heard of before, not a lot of people end up watching them. Because if I do a video on kind of something like the Queen Anthurium, there's a lot of people that are interested in that plant, so there's a lot of people that will watch it. I don't think these videos lend themselves well for people to explore new plants. It's a shame, because I think I would do this. I would look at some of these videos and just go, ooh, that's a plant I've never heard of. And I kind of like the care conditions of that. I might get that. But yeah, I don't think this is going to be a video that's necessarily going to go viral in any way or form. Not that that's important anyway. I'm doing this for the love of the plants, basically. But yeah, I think that's everything I wanted to say in terms of availability. It hasn't changed too much. Low double digits, at least here in the UK. It doesn't come out that often, but it's mainly, I think, because people aren't as aware of this plant, or there isn't a huge demand for it, which is a shame. So coming into pests for this one, however, the mealybugs love this one. They really do. Do they cause a lot of issue when it's mature leaves like this one? Because it's quite a leathery kind of leaf? No. Does it do a lot of damage when it's at this stage? Yes. And I've already picked out 2 or 3 mealybugs on this before I started filming, and I did the same yesterday. They're baby mealybugs, but they do love the juvenile leaves of this, like you cannot believe. the other thing, actually, and I forgot to mention this at the speed of growth earlier on, sometimes, with anthuriums, you get the tiny leaves and it starts growing and it takes a very long time to harden. This leaf here, from a new and emerging leaf that was down here and it was tiny, to the stage that it is now, a week and a half, which for an anthurium is super fast. Yeah, sorry. Can you tell that I'm very happy about the fact that this is a very fast anthurium? But I think that's the big one. Have I ever had thrips on this? No. Have I had whitefly on this? And I'm looking at a current whitefly. We're coming into that time of the year again where whiteflies are going to come in here. I'm hopeful, as the conservatory is going to get redone soon, that some of these pests might get obliterated that way, because I don't know where they might be hiding in nooks and crannies. They might not. They might just come with the plant and come back in. But whitefly is something that does go on this leaves, I find, especially when they're young like this, because you can see this is quite a bright leaf, and whiteflies like those kind of bright colors. When it's more mature, yes, they still go and sit at the back of the leaves, but not quite as much when it's kind of an immature, brighter green leaf, basically. But I think those are the big ones. I don't think I've ever had thrips on this, and I don't think I've ever had spider mites either. So mealybugs, yes. But again, I wonder if it has a propensity towards mealybugs, liking it, or whether or not there's just mealybugs around this plant because my conservatory, mealybug central, or whether or not it would have just happened naturally. I don't know. But it's not been too bad in terms of pests. It probably has more propensity towards pests than some of my other anthuriums, I will say that. A lot of my anthuriums, generally pests don't tend to go near them too much. Coming into care and accessories for this, and I will show you this because this is a bit that I do want to talk about. So can you see that little split there? Most people might sit there and go, oh, Memo, you knocked it, or it's like cosmetic damage. That's something that's kind of knocked it over. Nothing has touched this leaf, and that still happens. And this is the bit that I was talking about earlier on with Nikki from Plants, Pots and What's Not, so that she'd kind of done this on her channel and Instagram, I think, and she was asking this question. And I kind of went back to her and I'm just like, it's not just me, you're experiencing the same thing. When the leaves were more juvenile, it happens less the more it matures, but they rip really easily. Even if you haven't done anything with it, these are not leaves that get stuck to try to unfurl. They just get holes in them. It's really bizarre. And it takes you, and on one level, glad and also sad for Nikki, because she went through the same issues that I did. I'm just like, what pest is doing this? I am not seeing any pest. And you end up hovering and going, what is causing this? As far as we could both tell, nothing. I don't know what is causing that on the leaves of this plant. They're obviously super sensitive when they come out, probably more so than any of my other anthuriums. And I will say they are very thin-leaved when they first emerge and when they're hardening off. Like looking at the mature leaf, it's still a thinner leaf than a lot of anthuriums. I'm thinking kind of, again, like the examples I was giving for the Queen and the King anthurium, which is slightly more succulent leaves. But this isn't that thin that I would expect those rips to happen quite so easily. It's not the same thinness that you would get from like a fern, for instance. So that is one thing to bear in mind. More so, don't let it freak you out. Double check that it isn't pests in your condition, because obviously some pests might have a similar kind of result to your leaves. But generally speaking, this was a weird thing that happened, and I can only judge it on those two experiences. I don't know if this is an ongoing thing, but something to keep an eye out for, potentially. But yes, you might have noticed before, and I will lift it up yet again. This is in semi-hydro. Most of my anthuriums at this point are in Soil Ninjas, semi-hydro coarse mix, the bigger chunks. A lot of them were previously in Choose Upon. The anthuriums generally, I find, for me, grow a lot better in semi-hydro conditions than trying to get everything absolutely perfect for them in an aroid soil mix. Is that probably closer to what they're growing in nature? Probably. They're not growing in semi-hydro conditions, but I find that it works really well for this plant specifically. Did I see a difference moving, because this was originally an aroid soil mix, from an aroid soil mix into this? No, know, it didn't make it any better or easier. This, and again, this is the thing, not only is this a fast anthurium, out of all of my anthuriums, barring maybe the Vittarifolium, which is on the side here, which is the long strappy leaf anthurium, those two, the Vittarifolium and this one, least fussy anthuriums that I've got. They will just get on with it and do the things. You might get the occasional split. This is interesting as well because a lot of those thicker leaved anthuriums will show signs of like bacterial damage or those rings in the leaves really easily and all these things. This one, relatively easy. And I mean, I would relate this more, I don't know, it's not as thick as those leaves, but you know, the anthuriums with the one that you can get everywhere with the red flowers or the pink flowers, the white flowers, or they're not flowers, they're technically aesthetics. You know what I mean? Those ones can be quite hardy because they've been mass produced for so long. This is interesting because this is not mass produced, but it's kind of similar vibes. The leaves are thinner, but yeah. But other than that, I would say this is interesting because this is also one of the few anthuriums that I've got a support stake on. Because the stem is this big in not very long time at all. It was down here, and I've actually, when I moved it, I buried part of the stem in as well that already kind of had emerged. So this can get quite tall. So give it something that will give it a bit of structure. It doesn't need it necessarily, but it will, trust me, do yourself a favor and give it that kind of structure just so it doesn't snap back, basically, because it can get quite top heavy. These leaves do get a bit heavy. It's interesting because the petiole is probably heavier than the leaf itself, and the petiole is quite long. And some people might say, oh, it's leaning towards the light. This is getting the brightest light ever in my conditions. This has always been at the very top of my plant shelves. So this is getting very, very bright indirect light, almost direct light in the summer sometimes, and it does fine. It's not leaning towards the light, just to put your mind at ease there, basically. But yeah, this is one that I don't know. I've never grown it outside of my conservatory. Based on how thin the leaves are when they come in, whether or not it would appreciate being in a lower humidity, I don't know. And I don't know whether or not you would get maybe a few more splits. The splits might be happening, and I'm just thinking about this now because, and I'll see if I can do some further research. It was really tricky to find the kind of natural habitat of this plant. If it's getting somewhere kind of where the humidity is really high or it rains daily, it might be that. It might be the fact that it needs that high level of humidity so the leaves don't rip when it's unfurling. I don't know. I'll see if I can find anything and I'll put it at the top if I can't. But I think that's the big thing for care, really. It's not a difficult anthurium, which is not something I say very often when it comes. Some anthuriums are easier than others, but this, I would almost say if you can find this, well, I'm going to go on the limb here. This might be one if you're starting with anthuriums. A lot of people, when they're starting with anthuriums, will go for the Clarinarium. Cannot tell you how quickly I killed that anthurium. Then maybe move on to something like the crystallinum and then progress from there. You want an easy life, and it will still teach you some of the anthurium-y kind of idiosyncrasies without it kind of being even slightly difficult. This is a good contender, at least in my experience. But yeah. Coming into final thoughts for this one, I think you might have already guessed where this is going to head for me. With the first question that I usually ask myself is, knowing what I know now, if I didn't have this plant, would I get this? Oh, 100%. Yes, 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 yes. This brings me a lot more joy than I ever thought this would do, especially considering as that it was a bit of an impulse buy. Just add that into the basket as well. It's interesting because I think the plant that I bought originally because I wanted it and not this one has died off, I think. I can't remember what plant it was, but I don't think that's in my collection. I don't even have a recollection of what that plant was. So that tells you something. But yes, 100%. I would definitely get this. It has brought me a lot more joy than I thought it was going to do. Am I a fan of the Mickey Mouse ears? Would I have gone out of my way to get it? Probably not. Have I kind of fallen in love with it a bit now? Yes, and I'm also just realizing that it's a bit of a rude shape as well. My mind is in the gutter. Probably not enough, obviously, because I've only just realised this now. But but in terms of a score, if 0 or 1 is the lowest, 10 being the best, ooh, this might be surprising. And I've done a few of these reviews now, and they've all had relatively high scores. A solid 8 on this. I would almost go for a 9 for an Anthurium. I'll go for an 8. Let's go for an 8 for this one. Yeah, said most of what I wanted to say during the review. It's a fast Anthurium. It's a relatively easy to grow Anthurium. It lends itself easily towards propagation. Has it been fussy? No. Does it get those kind of slight rips? Yes. There are some pest issues there. Yes. Would you be able to grow this in a household condition? I don't know. If you do have this in household conditions, let us all know down below how you're finding it. But in terms of just bringing you a sheer level of joy and getting it keeps things interesting because the leaf transforms and all these things. But yeah, solid 8 for this plant. Very cool. Definitely got the memo, stamp of approval. But yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.